Thank you, Sandra. So first, thank you very much for being here. I think here at Wharton, I mean, obviously Goldman Sachs is the company our undergrads want to work for.
Love to hear that.
Obviously, you hire vast numbers of them. I think it makes it obviously a particularly interesting company to talk about for a couple of reasons. One is that you have, I think, for such a kind of elite company, a very young workforce, right? You have a lot of people coming in right at the beginning of their careers with all that entails. Investment banking is also known for kind of long hours, tough environment, and suddenly we're all talking about well-being, mental health,
yes,
and those sorts of things. So the kind of, when I talk to people in HR, these are two things they're kind of obsessing about. It's like generations and young people, and that's hard, and then what are we doing about burnout? So you kind of ground zero for all that. So I'm fascinated to hear kind of how you've been thinking about it. I mean, maybe just kind of going back to the pandemic, since that ended, how have you been thinking about, what have you been seeing in terms of kind of what your young employees are wanting and how that's changing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say within GS, so as you mentioned, we have a very young workforce. So 75% of our population is millennials and Gen Z. At the same time, over the past few years, the tenure of our senior people, our most senior people, our partners, is also extending, which I think is really valuable in the context of kind of our apprenticeship model. And so I do think that our most junior population and what attracts people to us is that apprenticeship model, the chance to learn from the very best. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, so we do an intern survey, and we've done this for the past decade, really to get a pulse on how the next generation is living their life, what they're focused on, so that we can, it's a leading indicator for, as these people, many of them become, full-time employees, how should we be preparing for that? But in our last intern survey, 87% of those interns who responded felt that the best development and coaching they were getting was in person, and the best way to form spontaneous connections was actually in person. And so while 2/3 of them, use chat and chat modalities kind of in their daily life to communicate with other people, and like only 20% of them, prefer phone, which I would say probably is flipped for many of our kind of more senior professionals. They very much value that in-person collaboration and apprenticeship model, which I think is core to our value proposition.
That's so interesting, because so much of the discussion around remote work, kind of I hear from managers, is this kind of, the young people, none of them want to be in the office, and they all want to be kind of sitting in their bedrooms and those sorts of things. But you're almost finding the opposite, that it's kind of
definitely. I mean, I think, but listen, you have to be there for a reason. I think it helps us that all of our people are in. And so we're all working together. If you're not benefiting from that in-person meetings or ability to observe a manager in action, I can understand why it might be frustrating to be in, you don't want to be in for the sake of being in. But I am also very mindful, we have the other kind of dimension I'd highlight in our demographics, in 1999, like around our IPO, 95% of our people were in 4 offices. So London, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and New York, obviously. And 95% of our people in the Americas were in New York. Now you look at that, we have 10,000 people in New York, but we have 25,000 people across the US. Only 40% of our people globally sit in those offices now. The rest of them are in places like Dallas, Salt Lake, India, on the continent, and Europe. So we have a much more dispersed, globally kind of oriented workforce too. And we think about that a lot in terms of global connectivity, making sure that we have, and some of that's in-person collaboration at kind of key moments. So our campus program or training program is done in person, and bringing people together. Our, promotion type learning events and leadership acceleration are all done in person to provide people networking opportunities and bring those cohorts together, frankly, to benefit from getting to know each other, connectivity, access to senior leaders, really kind of the best of the development program.
So it is, so kind of the global connectivity, everything that technology allows,
yes,
but a lot of in-person as well. You're 5 days in the week, 5 days in the office,
yeah,
every week. Just curious, quick poll, how many companies here, how many of you are 5 days in the office?
I mean, I'd be quick to say, what we emphasize with our people is that we want them to have the flexibility to balance their personal and professional lives. And I think that goes to the comments you made on kind of resilience and well-being. It's important. So we are predominantly an office culture, but that doesn't mean that our people don't have the flexibility to be there for an important moment for, a child, or, have caregiving responsibilities for a parent, or, meet the plumber. And so I do think that there is that reality, and frankly, the technology tools that really, frankly, the pandemic accelerated have made that in some ways a lot easier for people as well.
Do you think, a lot of companies that have looked at bringing people back in have just backed off because they've decided they wouldn't be able to pull it off. What do you think was kind of key in the messaging to make that successful?
We were very front. So I think it goes back to purpose, and clearly culture, which I think has been a hot topic today with this group, and a lot of what has been said has resonated with me. Culturally, we are grounded in a model of collaboration and partnership. Those are two of our core values. And ultimately, our apprenticeship model thrives best in person. And David Solomon, our CEO, said that from the very beginning of the pandemic in terms of this. We can function and kind of play at our best, kind of in this environment. But ultimately, it's very important to us to bring our people back together when it's safe to do so. And so I think, our messaging has been consistent. I think where I've seen struggles, and this is definitely a hot topic in the CHRO community in terms of where it's harder now. People make life choices. They've, changed where they live. They've changed how they work. And the question of what is the value proposition of coming back in? I think, employers really have to make that worthwhile and meaningful. For us, I think that in some ways has been easier because we do have that value proposition with the consistency.
Yeah, that consistency. Yeah, I think those companies that kind of said, oh, you can live anywhere, and then kind of, a year later, actually, we've changed our minds. That's very damaging. So.
Yeah. But I do think, listen, we have a large portion of our workforce, like so many employers, and I think, people question their life choices after the pandemic. We saw a talent super cycle. We were also hiring and growing kind of in that period following the pandemic. And we have a lot of new people, and we're very mindful they were onboarded in a pretty atypical kind of, time. And so thinking about kind of that journey, culture has been a really important, kind of thing for us to be intentional about in terms of for that cohort of people, especially our young people, educating them on the value proposition, their role in promulgating the culture. For most senior people, we've also really invested in kind of recognizing they play a critical role in kind of leading from the top on culture, and so we've had a series of kind of more formal sessions over the past year to really one cohort of that was for all of our employees, and so we've had sessions that have been led by a senior leader, bringing together people kind of across levels to have an open and candid discussion on how is our culture evolving, what is recognizing it's a living, breathing thing, which has been said earlier today and really resonated with me. But what are we grounded in? What do we value? How is that evolving? And having more of a two-way dialogue, frankly, in terms of that as a group to be conscious of it. And then for our most senior people, we've had 2-day offsites over the past year, kind of covering our entire partner cohort to do the same thing, but more focused on the leadership aspects of it.
Kind of building back better.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I'm curious, do you think, that cohort that started in 2020, do you see any kind of enduring effects on them of that kind of very weird onboarding?
I think my impression is we worked really hard to be, incredibly transparent and communicate. You almost went, kind of overboard on communication during that period to try to bridge the gap. And I think, but I do think that, resilience, I think mental health is a huge focus for us. 1 in 4 Americans struggle with a diagnosable mental health disorder. Based on Johns Hopkins kind of analysis, we certainly see that playing through in terms of dependence and our own data in terms of that as a topic. So I think broadly speaking, I think that's impacting our younger professionals, but I think it's also impacting kind of the broader organization and people's families as well.
I think it's a really interesting topic. It's one that I kind of felt like working in HR, pre-2018, the topic never came up, right?
Well, I'm proud to say we've had a wellness team since 1999.
I wasn't listening hard enough. But the last 4 or 5 years, everybody is really focused on this topic. And I do think, some of the statistics about kind of the mental health of kind of young people, and I think it kind of nosedived around 2012. A lot of people point to Facebook, but who knows? But there's kind of this persistent downward trend in mental health. Do you think you're starting to see that coming into do you think the young people who are coming in now are more at risk than they were before, or do you think we're just better at recognizing that this is an issue we should pay attention to?
I think it's too soon to tell. So we obviously have seen continued growth, and so we monitor data like leave data, leveraging our employee assistance program, kind of a host of different, are people taking vacation, as kind of indicators on this. But I think ultimately what we've done is put in place a series of initiatives over the past few years. So I think the biggest thing for us has been destigmatizing this and creating much more of an open dialogue in the workplace. And so, so one of the things we've done is implement a mental health first aider program. So we have 700 professionals that have been trained through that program over the past couple of years, and our goal is to get to 1,000 by the end of the year, which I think will probably exceed. I probably get an email a week from someone who's gone through that program and said, this didn't just help me in terms of identifying and helping to support employees on my desk, it also helped in my personal life in terms of just being more aware. And so again, that program is focused on identifying and supporting issues. But I think over the past month, we've actually gone a step further and implemented a broad manager training, which we're requiring all of our managers to take, all of our vice presidents and above, that really is focused on the role of a manager in supporting employees. And really, we have a framework that we call for manager assessment or manager effectiveness called KFCI, Know Me, Focus Me, Care About Me, Inspire Me. But it's ultimately about understanding if you see a shift in someone's behavior on the desk, and trying to think about, it's trying to educate them on their role. Your role is not to be a mental health professional and diagnose an issue. Your role is to actually understand the resources that are available to support your employee and to truly be supportive. And so that's something that we rolled out. We had done it in person, over a number of years. We really wanted to scale it to get to all of our managers with it.
That's so interesting, because I think so often the approach with this is, okay, we'll make lots of resources available to our employees.
Yeah.
But starting with the managers and kind of their role, I think is really effective in kind of.
Yeah. But listen, I would say on the resilience front, we're really, on the destigmatization, so we rolled out Calm, a premium access to Calm for our employees and their dependents. We've had thousands of people sign up since we did that in January. I did an interview with Jay Shetty, who's the Chief Purpose Officer. We had incredible engagement from our employees who came to that. And that conversation was really around how can you consider using mindfulness and meditation? We're a high performance culture, to your point. The risk of burnout is real, but how do you balance that and actually enable yourself to perform at your best by incorporating some of these tools? So we really are trying to open that dialogue in terms of this is important. Going back to another stat that I found super interesting from our summer intern survey is that 65% of our summer interns use Do Not Disturb regularly to basically create those boundaries. I actually think that's a great thing, but it's not something you would think of, to your point, when you think of somebody coming in at a very junior level to a corporate environment like Goldman Sachs.
I remember being terrified. I was teaching a class on careers, and I asked my students, how many of you feel you need to check your email in the middle of the night? And it felt like 2/3 of the hands went up. And so, I think that boundary setting is something we've struggled with. There has sometimes been a bit of cynicism about these kind of well-being programs. There's are people all frantic and burnt out? Here's a yoga class. I think one of the things that Goldman Sachs has actually been quite proactive about has been the boundary setting to try and actually force people to switch off. What have been some of the kind of approaches that seem to be working?
Coming out of the pandemic, one of the things we saw in our data was that our employees were not taking vacation. And I don't know about any of you guys, but I certainly found that in the pandemic, my personal life and professional life were completely blurred. There were no boundaries. And I think we all feel it's incredibly important from a resilience perspective to have that time off to recharge. And so we actually implemented, mandatory kind of 5-day consecutive vacation, which we ask managers and provide them the data to monitor. So are your employees taking vacation? Are they taking consecutive days off? We also gave all of our employees 2 additional days of vacation to really drive the point home. This is important to your resilience. And then I think we also, there was this psychological safety. We had some portion of your vacation which could be carried over. And so people were like, oh, I'll take those days next year. They never take them. They never take those days. And so what we said was you use it or you lose it, and we want you to use it. And so we sent a really strong top-down message on that, and we have seen those usages going up. I think the other thing culturally that I'm pretty proud of is the fact that we extended parenting leave for all parents. So we had 20 weeks minimum leave for women, and we've given that to our men as well. And we've seen increases in the number of men that are taking those leaves really globally across every office. And so I think changing the culture in terms of this being acceptable and important is part of what we're trying to evolve.
So in terms of kind of on the analytics and data side, so you mentioned looking at holidays and kind of who's taking their vacation days is kind of an important thing to track. Any other indicators for these well-being that you keep an eye on?
Definitely. I mean, I think we use sentiment surveys similar to I think many and some of the things that have been referenced earlier today in terms of identifying trends and themes. So we survey our broad population currently twice a year. We have an ongoing debate on whether we'll continue doing that or do it in a more targeted way. But it's been fairly consistent. And I think we leverage that data. We don't just look at it by business and by region. We look at it by tenure. We look at it by level, to really identify kind of the issues. I mean, I'd say one interesting, point that we saw in that was just, that really kind of facilitated an impetus on mobility. So you've got this high talent organization. How do you keep people who are kind of have a growth mindset? How do you retain them at the firm? Sometimes their best next job isn't actually in their team. What we've seen and what we've really been trying to shift our culture on from a manager perspective is the reality is if you have a top performer in your team and you're not able to offer them advancement, they're likely to leave and go outside the firm. So ultimately, we're really trying to adapt our mindset to a one GS approach for talent in terms of your next job, your next stretch assignment may be somewhere else in the organization. That's a shift we're trying to make both in terms of making it easier for our junior employees to navigate mobility and understand what roles might be available to them based on their experience. And part of that is giving them opportunities to understand who they could reach out to in an informal way to actually learn about opportunities that might be available, or reach out to HR, to a recruiter to learn more. So giving them more data and insights, and then also changing the culture at the top of the organization from a manager perspective of understanding that what is best for you're likely to lose that person anyway. So let's give them the next stretch opportunity. Let's retain those people in the firm and help them grow professionally.
That's interesting because, I mean, when I think of companies like Goldman Sachs, where you, again, hire large numbers of young people, do an excellent job of training them, tend to be reasonably pyramidal, maybe not always explicitly up or out, but with kind of there are not seats for everybody. How do you think about retention? I mean, it feels like in that world, actually having a lot of people leave is quite healthy in terms of kind of creating mobility opportunities for kind of more junior people. Do you have kind of some sense of retention is too low, too high in these areas, or are you moving to a world where you kind of really want to be keeping more people?
I think our focus is on retaining our best performers. And so I think that, and I think, frankly, there could be someone who's struggling in one role and ultimately may be a high performer in another. And so looking at, skills and how those may be transferable is important. But ultimately, I think our goal is generally to retain and kind of promote and build careers around kind of, excellent talent. And I think, and it also aligned to people's, personal choices as well.
So we've talked a bit about kind of apprenticeship, mental health and resilience. Kind of on these generational differences, again, you span from kind of your very tenured partners through to a lot of new people coming in. So academics fight endlessly about whether there actually are generational differences, but certainly young people behave very differently from higher tenured people. Are there particular areas where you see there are kind of conflicts in the expectations of kind of people of different generations?
I mean, I think going back to the way we approach screening of when we think about kind of hiring talent is looking at people who, and seeing how we ask a series of standardized questions across all of our applicants now to really understand kind of cultural alignment to our approach. So I think that helps in some regards. But I would say, listen, I mean, the reality is, one of the things that came through in this summer intern survey that I referenced is, 80% of our summer interns are using AI in their daily lives, and they think it's going to have a very positive impact on society ultimately. I'm very mindful coming into Goldman Sachs, like we need to, one of the key focus areas for us is really how do we leverage AI to enable our employees to be more strategic, to facilitate kind of their roles. And so recognizing that they're using it in their daily life primarily for research and writing is what we saw kind of in the data. And so I do think that that's one thing that's different. We're actually doing a session for our partners that's being led by some of our tech bankers around AI for partners. How do they use, because our tech guys are quite conversant on how to use it in their daily lives, but I wouldn't say our broad partnership is. And so that's something we have to bring the organization along. One of the topics at our recent partner office site was actually some of those initiatives to bring AI into the workforce and how our partners can expect to see that, kind of come into the way we work, which I think is an important learning.
So it's the upside down apprenticeship, getting them to learn
exactly.
from the analysts coming in. So we've got a few questions coming in from the iPad. One about these kind of boundaries, which is kind of an interesting one. Have you seen differences in the career outcomes of employees that set boundaries and take vacations versus those that don't?
I wouldn't say it's based on that. I think it's about working smarter, not necessarily working harder. And I think that's one of the concepts of, and I certainly found just in my own professional experience, I mean, as someone who became a parent, a few years into my career journey at Goldman Sachs, I worried about how I would find enough time in the day to do everything that I needed to do as a professional and also still be a parent. I think it's about working efficiently and working smarter. And so I think I actually don't see, and again, I don't have data necessarily to back this up, but I do see, incredibly productive people who are setting boundaries. And we certainly are trying to model that from a leadership perspective.
I was going to ask how you kind of sell that message, because I think that's always historically it has been kind of the view of investment banking is this ultimate commitment, right? You just demonstrate your full commitment all the time. So modeling a switch from that must take some quite serious messaging.
Yeah, 100%. The tone from the top is really important in terms of communicating that. I think walking the walk is equally important in terms of showing that you're prioritizing and things outside. I think some of the things we've done around kind of vacation policy and some of these other areas have really kind of driven that point home. But ultimately, it is I take the data, going back to the data on men taking parenting leave. That's not something you would have seen 10 years ago. They couldn't imagine leaving. It was a point of pride. I can't leave the desk for more than a day. Now you see in large numbers, kind of men taking these leaves and supporting their families, which I think is a great indicator of kind of the cultural shift.
That's interesting. Another question that came in, we always get some version of how do you measure performance. So we have another version of how do you measure performance. Obviously, these are complicated jobs, and you talk about kind of we want to retain our high performers. Any new thoughts on, beyond just kind of my manager gives me a 5 on how we kind of evaluate performance and track that? Yeah,
so I'd say we implemented, again, relying on our sentiment data. One of the things we've tracked and this initiative came out of that in terms of both KFCI for manager effectiveness, but also just looking to invest in our people and their development was a framework called 3 Conversations. And so essentially it is, you have a goal setting conversation. We're in goal setting right now at our firm. With your manager at the beginning of the year. Mid-year, you have a check-in to actually assess those goals and your performance relative to the goals from a manager perspective, and then recalibrate as needed, recognizing things shift. And then at the end of the year, you have a full 360-degree review. Again, that's done via soliciting kind of feedback from people you work with closely at all levels, and then reviewing that with managers. And if you're a manager, you're getting manager feedback as part of that. I think we saw actually, between that and KFCI, we saw increases in our sentiment survey data in terms of people feeling invested in from a managerial perspective by creating that. But I think what I'd say is with Gen Z in particular, what you see, and I think that there's lots of outside studies on this, an insatiable desire for connectivity with managers. So what we're really trying to do is upskill our managers to focus on feedback and giving more real-time feedback and engaging with their employees. And so this is something that we think is a generational shift and something that, frankly, I think personally our in-person culture actually benefits in that regard, because it's easy to stop by somebody's desk and be like, hey, great job on this, or these are a couple of things. I think to avoid the shut off from the intense negative feedback that you might get. And so I do think that that's something that's been we're trying to upskill our managers and really ask them to think about how they engage with their employees, not just in 3 conversations, but also on a day-to-day basis.
That's interesting. It kind of working through the iPad, it fits with kind of one of the other questions I have here, which is, have you seen a shift in how you motivate kind of young workers? And I think so. Partly, I think you talk about feedback. We talk a lot about purpose. I don't know how different.
Yeah.
I mean, whether again that's always young people or whether it's particularly salient in this kind of new generations, but in terms of kind of how you're contributing to ESG and all those sorts of things, is that becoming more important as part of managing people?
I think purpose is incredibly important and something that, again, we were very focused on. So a few years ago, we actually we do quarterly town halls to give updates on performance, and previously those were our most senior population. They were in person for managing directors and our partners. We actually opened those up to all of our employees, so to create transparency and really emphasize that we want to bring people along on the journey in terms of the strategy, recognizing, but then I'd say the other side of that is understanding how your role fits into the strategy, I think is equally important from a purpose perspective. And so along with that, what we've been trying to do is equip managers and recognizing, frankly, I mean, we look at click rates, we look at engagement, we look at attendance at these things, level of Q&A, every metric 6 ways to Sunday in terms of are we reaching our people with our key messages. But I think that, one of the things we've done is kind of after key moments, we're pushing out toolkits to our managers to really underscore core points and contextualize it, frankly, for our employees so they understand how what they're doing day to day actually ties into the strategy of the firm. So we provided a great deal more transparency over the past few years externally in terms of our strategy, but it was equally important for our people to understand that and how they fit into it.
I mean, one of the challenges that strikes me, I mean, my generation, without wishing to give away my age too much, I mean, I think surprisingly depoliticized in many ways, like very happy to leave our views behind when we come into the office. It seems that that's changing. Is that, I mean, in terms of managing conflicts and kind of between kind of different political views in the workplace, is that becoming more complicated, do you think?
I think it's something that we've tried to address via a real push around allyship and what it means to be an ally and supportive in the workplace. So we have strong, thriving inclusion networks that support that. But more importantly, we had an allyship conference, last year. We've done allyship training for managers in terms of what it means to be, kind of a supportive, kind of professional in the workplace and how to have open dialogues in a way where people feel safe. People feeling safe, and frankly, that's something we monitor from a sentiment perspective too, to see across different cohorts of our population. Do people feel safe and supported in the environment? And so that's something we're keenly focused on. But again, I think we're trying to take it from the angle of how do we build an environment where people feel comfortable expressing their identity and create managers that are facilitating that and setting an example and role modeling it.
So it's both the measurement, but then also the training, kind of cascading top down, kind of see that message in a lot you're doing. Great. Well, we don't have time, unfortunately, for more questions, but it's been fascinating to hear what you're up to. Thank you so much for coming.
This is a terrific conference. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the sessions.